This is Pony Express Road here in Draper. It's the frontage road on the west side of Interstate 15, and it's a street that you might use to get to IKEA. The name of the street is not random, it's not just a historical tribute. Nope, this street traces the actual alignment used by the Pony Express 160 years ago. I'll tell you more about that and more on today's episode of This Old Road. This episode of This Old Road is a little different than usual. I won't be driving on crumbling pavement in some lonely rural outpost or exploring a rusty narrow bridge from a century ago. Nope. Today's episode takes place on busy city streets filled with traffic. Today on This Old Road, I'm tracing the route of the Pony Express across Utah's Salt Lake Valley. Now, if you're expecting me to show you old horseshoe tracks on a dusty trail, we won't find that today. All of the vestiges of whatever might have once been there has long since been paved over. But what I will show you is that those wiry young horsemen galloped right through the heart of what is today a bustling metropolis, and that there are still remnants of their legacy scattered all across the valley, hiding in plain sight. This map of the Pony Express route shows all of its nearly 200 stations, spaced a dozen or so miles apart, all along the 1,960-mile route from Missouri to California. In Utah, there were 27 stations covering 284 miles of the trail, and the western half of it is very remote, even today. I'll be covering 3 stations: Salt Lake City, Travelers Rest, and Rockwells, and the routing that those riders use to get through the valley. To begin, I'll start at This Is the Place State Park on Salt Lake City's East Bench. This location on Sunnyside Avenue, across from the Hogle Zoo, was where riders first emerged into the valley after their descent down what we know today as Immigration Canyon. The location of this monument was not an exchange station, but those horsemen carried the mail right past this spot every day. Historically, this location was the same place where other notable westward travelers also first saw the Salt Lake Valley. The Donner Party came by here in 1846 after their disastrous struggle over the Wasatch Mountains, and then, 1 year later, the first of the Mormon pioneers entered the valley here too. This is the National Pony Express Monument. It's an expansive memorial centered around a beautiful 20-foot high statue which depicts the horse exchange at a Pony Express station. The waiting station master stands by with a fresh steed as the young rider with the mochila pulls up alongside, ready to switch horses. The statue depicts the changing of the horses at a Pony Express station. The young rider pulls up on a horse galloping in, and the station master is there with another horse ready for him to go. So the rider jumps off the horse with his satchel full of mail and jumps on the waiting horse and continues on its way. No time to waste. So just doing some quick back of the envelope math, if the route was about 2,000 miles and they got the mail across in 10 days, then that means they had to move the mail about 200 miles every single day. The detail in this artwork is amazing. The casting stunningly illustrates the precision of the operation. Around behind the statue, you'll find a recreation of what a typical exchange station looked like. This replica was constructed as a showcase for the Salt Lake 2002 Winter Olympics. The station was constructed from logs bound by mortar with an earthen rooftop for insulation. Back in the day, the Pony Express Company constructed stations from whatever materials were available locally. For example, this one at Simpson Springs was constructed from locally quarried stones. Rockwells Station, which I'll cover later in this video, was also built from stones. The replica station here is only about 25 feet by 15, maybe less, and that was pretty typical. The station masters lived full-time in these confined quarters, often far from any population centers. They were tasked with feeding and resting the horses and then saddling them up to prepare for the next rider. It was a very lonely existence. Behind the reconstructed house, you can see the recreated stables, too. This monument is located within This Is the Place State Park, but it's not in the portion of the park where an admission fee is required. You can park in the lot next to the Mormon Battalion Memorial. Take some time to explore, look around here. There are a lot of informational signs to fill in the details about the whole Pony Express enterprise. For the first of the actual stations in this video, I'm starting with Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City wasn't just an exchange station, this was a home station. A home station was the endpoint for a rider's day. The riders didn't just hop onto the next horse and continued on, like the statue depicted. Upon arrival in Salt Lake, the rider had reached the end of his run. He handed off the mochila to the next rider, a fresh rider who would keep the mail moving ahead and carry on through a half dozen or so more exchanges until he himself reached the next home station. As I mentioned earlier, Salt Lake City was an actual city with hotels and restaurants and saloons and stores, and whatever other creature comforts might have been needed. There were nearly 10,000 people living in the Salt Lake Valley, and that made it a good place to rest up. Today, you'll find the Pony Express Monument right in the heart of downtown Salt Lake at 163 Main Street on the east side of the street. It's very near to where the station was located, which was only a few doors to the north. But here's where it gets a little murky. This was an establishment called the Salt Lake House, which was a luxury hotel of that era. It was located at 141 South Main, just up the block from that Pony Express marker. Mark Twain and other contemporaries were known to have favored the Salt Lake House as they traveled through. Now, many accounts say that the Pony Express station in Salt Lake was located inside of the Salt Lake House. However, other later investigations have included that the Pony Express station was probably located across the street from the Salt Lake House. In the early 20th century, the Salt Lake Tribune built its newsroom on the same site that had previously been occupied by the Salt Lake House, and the Salt Lake Tribune remained there until about 15 years ago. Today, there's an alleyway which is adorned with the old Newsboy logo from the Newspaper Agency Corporation, and, more importantly for this video, there's also a plaque attached to the wall which claims that this location is the spot where the Salt Lake Pony Express station was. Now, as I mentioned before, there's a little bit of doubt or whether the station was actually right there inside of the Salt Lake House or across the street where the Kearns building is today. But either way, when you're reading this plaque, you know you're really close to where the station was once located. Now, before I head south with the riders, I want to call out one more thing here in downtown Salt Lake City. From the location of those plaques in the alleyway, walk northward up Main Street for about 150 yards until you reach this monument. It's just across First South. This is the monument to the completion of the first transcontinental telegraph. Wait, what? Why am I talking about a telegraph monument in a video about the Pony Express? Well, the event commemorated here is what put the Pony Express out of business. The transcontinental telegraph was completed in October of 1861, right here at this spot in Salt Lake City. And, sadly, the very next day, the Pony Express ceased operations. Once messages could be transmitted across the country almost instantaneously, the value proposition for 10-day delivery no longer made sense. In the end, the Pony Express operated for less than 19 months. I find it really interesting that something which is so iconic in the lore of the American West actually had such a short lifespan. When the Pony Express riders left the Salt Lake City station, their route headed due south along Main Street and State Street, all the way down the valley. The next station along the way was called Travelers Rest, probably. Unfortunately, just like in Salt Lake, there are competing claims about the location of this station too, but this one is even more contentious. Every source that I've read agrees that the station was located 9 miles south of Salt Lake. There's also agreement that the route passed right in front of where the Chief Wasatch wood-carved statue is at the main entrance to Murray Park. That's consistent because the street in front is State Street, and we know that the route ran down State Street. But there's conflicting information about where the station itself might have been located. I believe that it was on the west side of State Street, here where Interstate 15 passes underneath in Murray. So this is really my best approximation of the location of the Travelers Rest station. Pretty much right here in front of this title company, and where State Street crosses over Interstate 215. Here's the Pony Express Monument in Murray Park. This monument was erected at this location in 1960. Now, it's certain that this spot along 5300 South near Vine Street in the southeast corner of Murray Park was not the location of the Pony Express station. In fact, the marker itself says just that. The text on this marker indicates that it was rebuilt at this site after the original one had been demolished by a car crashing into it. It says that the Travelers Rest Station had been located at 6460 South State, where the wrecked marker had been too. But after the original marker was ruined, why didn't they just rebuild the replacement monument at the same location? Well, the answer to that is simple. In 1960, the new interstate highways were being planned, and the Salt Lake Valley's new belt route was slated to be built right through that spot where the wrecked marker had been. So eventually they were going to have to move the marker anyway. Hindsight shows us that that's exactly what did happen. Today, Interstate 15 passes underneath State Street right at the location where the Pony Express station would have been. And the marker is safely standing in the park away from the traffic 3 miles away. I've come now about 3/4 of a mile south of that freeway overpass to this marker, which also claims to be the spot for that station. Although the text on this one says Traders Rest and the one in Murray calls it Travelers Rest, both markers are referring to the same station. This was not uncommon. There are quite a few Pony Express stations which have slightly different names on various maps and paperwork, so don't let the differences in the names confuse things. This particular marker is located at 7170 South State in front of the Shane Company, and it was placed here more than 4 decades after the one in Murray Park. So what's going on here? Truthfully, I'm not sure. My belief is that the location for the station that we're talking about was where the freeway is today. I stick to that theory for 2 reasons. First, because that particular location information came from the earlier wrecked marker, and that earlier marker may well have been cited when some folks who were old enough to remember when the Pony Express actually ran were still alive. And the second reason is because the Interstate 215 location is exactly 9 miles from the Salt Lake City location. But the truth is, I don't really know for sure. Either one of them could be the correct location. An intriguing wrinkle in all of this is that the newer marker, that one in front of the Shane Company, also contains additional information that was new to me. It says that this station, Travelers Rest or Traders Rest, was not an original station in 1860. According to the text here, the station was added because the distance between Salt Lake City and the next station, Rockwells, was too far, 20 miles. So they added an intermediate station in August of 1861. That's an interesting datum, and it's something that I had never read before. I don't have any reason to doubt it. The story provided is very detailed and it includes exact dates, so that adds to its credibility in my opinion. However, that leaves me in an awkward position of accepting some of the information from this marker and rejecting other things, namely the location itself. So if you know more about this, please let me know. After departing from Traveler's Rest, wherever that may have been, riders continued on their southward trek along the path of modern-day State Street all the way to the south end of the valley. State Street became US 91 in 1926, and then in the early 1960s, Interstate 15 was built directly on top of State Street in this area. This means that the freeway traces the actual path of the Pony Express in the area around 123rd South and Bangerter Highway. In a nod to the history, the West Side Frontage Road was given the name Pony Express Road, but few people realize that this was actually the route of the Pony Express. At the point of the mountain, the horsemen arrived at the next station, Rockwell. Rockwell was named after early Mormon pioneer Porter Rockwell, and actually it wasn't just named for him, he owned the place. Porter Rockwell operated a hotel, saloon, and hot springs resort here, and it was a natural spot for a station. Now, Rockwell himself was a legendary character in the early history of Utah. Unlike the image that we may have about early pioneers, Rockwell was a brawler who wasn't afraid of a fight. Among other things, he served as a bodyguard to Brigham Young and was deputized for territorial law enforcement, while at the same time serving as a general authority in the LDS Church. The Pony Express monument for Rockwell Station is located on the southwest corner of 146 South at Porter Rockwell Boulevard, which is one of the main streets in Bluffdale. The monument itself was built from rocks that were taken from the old station when it was demolished. So these stones that you're seeing actually came from Rockwell Station. That's pretty cool history. Next to the marker is a life-size statue of Porter Rockwell himself, waving his hat at passing traffic. In what appears to be a recurring theme of these stations, this marker is not located at the actual site of the station either. In this case, now that's not because the location is uncertain, but rather it's because the location itself is inaccessible. The site where Rockwell's Enterprise sat was incorporated into the site of the Utah State Prison when it was relocated from Sugar House to the point of the mountain back in 1951. So, the marker was moved to a plot alongside 146 South at the southern edge of the prison but outside of the prison walls. Actually, it turns out the marker may have been moved multiple times over the years, but it's certain that it's not on the actual site of where the station was, because the true location was behind the barbed wire and guard towers for 70 years. So, what do you think? I took a little bit of license by focusing on an old route instead of sticking solely to the formula of old pavement. Did you enjoy that? Is this something you'd like to see more of in the future? Please let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please click on the thumbs up so that YouTube will share it with others too. And if you enjoy the content on this old road, I'd be honored to have you as a subscriber. Thank you for watching.